Today we are going to talk about how to add more details to our writing. I'm going to read a story to you called A Visitor on the Bus. And as I read it, I want you to listen for places that the author used details to make her writing more interesting.
A visitor on the bus. Tap, tap, tap. What? I said, turning around to face Jeffrey, a boy in my third grade class. Not to scare you or anything, but look. He pointed a little above my head at the huge bus window I was leaning up against. My head slowly looked up where the window met the metal frame. There was a bee crawling along the window frame on the inside of the bus. He was shaking his little stinger at me as he walked. Fear quickly rose up inside me, and I began shaking in my shoes. I really had a dislike for bees, or I guess you could say I'm deathly afraid of them. I began trying to problem solve about how exactly to move away from the little insect. We were on our way back from a field trip to the zoo, and my teacher, Mrs. Porter, reminded us repeatedly that we are to stay seated. I glanced back up at the bee. Yep, he was still there, staring right back at me. Right about then, my friend Kelly noticed the bee too. I saw as her eyes grew big, and then they met mine, just as terrified. What should we do? Panicked Kelly. I don't know, but I don't want to get stung, and the bee is really close to my head. I'm telling the teacher. Mrs. Porter! Kelly yelled. Mrs. Porter looked back at us, concerned. Our teacher began making her way down the aisle of the bus toward us. What is it, girls? What's wrong? Asked Mrs. Porter. That's what's wrong. I pointed to the tiny creature creeping back and forth on the window pane. Oh, yikes! Exclaimed Mrs. Porter. We watched as she calmly went back to her seat. I thought she was going to go back and sit down when I saw her grab a plastic bag and walk back towards us. All right, girls, duck your heads down and cover, she advised. We ducked our heads and covered. However, I looked up out of the corner of my eye to witness our teacher, shoe in hand, smacking the window repeatedly. Whack, whack, whack. I sat up and looked at our teacher as she examined the bottom of her shoe. Yup, I got him all right. Poor guy. I bet he was just buzzing around looking for a flower and somehow ended up on our bus. He was probably just as scared as you two. Well, good news is we're all safe, she said, and scraped the bee from her shoe into the plastic bag. She gave me a wink as she headed back to her seat. Crisis averted.
Adding details makes our writing more exciting. And adding details doesn't mean you have to write a lot of extra paragraphs. It can be as simple as replacing basic nouns with more descriptive words and phrases. Let's look at some examples of how to do that.
So one way we can add details to our writing is looking for our nouns and trying to make them more specific. Making something specific means it's telling us exactly what it is. So instead of saying something like book, I might say The Wild Robot. This makes it more interesting for my reader because if I was to say, I was reading a book, they can kind of picture it, they know what a book looks like. But if I say, I was reading The Wild Robot, if they've read The Wild Robot before or they've seen this book, it's easier for them to picture in their mind what exactly is going on. So I can make my nouns more specific to help add details. So if we said dinner, I was eating dinner, and I want to make it more specific. I could describe the dinner that I was having. So instead of just saying, I was eating dinner, I might say that I was eating homemade spaghetti and then maybe I had bread with it, and instead of just saying bread, I might talk about what type it is. So again, making it more specific. And garlic bread. if I'm out in the backyard playing with the dogs and it gets hot and I'm like, so I have a drink, instead of just saying drink, I could say, maybe I had some fresh squeezed orange juice. So all of these examples help make a better picture in the mind of our reader. They can see me sitting there with my cup of orange juice, or they can see me at the table eating spaghetti and garlic bread. They're not having to guess what I had for dinner. They're not having to guess what I had to drink or what book I'm reading. When I make my nouns specific, it's easier for my reader to know exactly what was happening. I also want to make sure that I am making my words interesting. So I can use juicy words. I want to make the things I'm saying exciting. So make my words more interesting. Dinner was good. Okay, so the reader knows I liked my dinner, but it's not that interesting, it's not very exciting. So instead of saying dinner was good, how could we describe dinner? Remember, we still want to keep this idea the same. Dinner was good. So yeah, maybe I use a word like delicious. So delicious. I love math, she said. So what can we use instead of the word said? Yeah, maybe she exclaimed. Maybe she's talking quietly, so she whispered it. And then our last one, it was fun. What can we use that's more descriptive than fun? What about enjoyable? It was enjoyable. You might remember when we worked on shades of meaning. This is kind of like that. Instead of using a basic version of the word, we're making it more interesting. We're having a better shade of meaning.
Another way that we can make our writing more interesting is by showing the reader what's going on instead of just telling them. Listen as I read the first paragraph of The Perfect Spot. Cold, wet sand surrounded my feet on all sides with each step I took. The cool breeze wafted the scent of musty salt beneath my nose. I continued my walk down the coast as I scanned the beach for the perfect spot. My eyes trailed over flip-flops, small colorful shovels and buckets, assortments of beach towels, and giant sun hats. I stopped for a second, noticing an empty area in the sand. Walking quickly in that direction with my beach bag weighing down my arm, I was too slow. I observed as a man, woman, and 2 kids came barreling down from the boardwalk. They stopped in the area I spotted and heaved a pile of beach chairs and sand toys onto the ground in relief. I threw back my head in frustration and continued my trek down the beach. The author didn't just tell us where they were. They could have said, I walked around the beach looking for the perfect spot. Instead, they showed us where they were by describing what they saw, heard, and felt. Even without saying that they were at the beach, we knew exactly where they were. We want our readers to feel that way about our narratives, like they are experiencing things right along with us. So let's practice how we can replace some telling phrases with showing phrases. Remember, we're going to be using our senses to do this.
Okay, so let's work on replacing these telling phrases with showing phrases. Remember, we want to show readers where we are and show readers how you feel. So here's a telling phrase. We were in the car. This tells the reader exactly where I am. They don't have to try to figure it out. There's not a lot of detail. So how could we show the reader that we are in the car? Think about when you're in the car. What do you do? What do you feel? What do you hear? What's going on? I know when I get in the car, I sit in the seat, I buckle my seatbelt, turn the key, the engine comes on. So I might add some of those details to let them know I'm in the car. The trick is I don't want to just tell the reader I'm in my car. So what about this? My seatbelt clicked into place and the engine came to life. I turned up the radio and rolled down the window. I'm not telling the reader that I'm in the car, but the reader can use clues like seatbelt, engine, turning on the radio, rolling down the window to know that I'm in my car. And for how we feel, I was hungry. How can we let the reader know that we feel hungry without saying, I'm hungry? Think about when you're hungry. What's going on? Maybe your stomach starts to growl, maybe your mouth starts to water. You can use some of those details to show the reader that you're hungry. My stomach growled and my mouth watered. Again, I'm not telling the reader that I'm hungry, but I'm showing them with my words. We've all had our stomach growl, we've had our mouth water before, and those let us know the person saying this is hungry. But this way is a little bit more interesting than just saying, I was hungry.
Take some time now to go over your rough draft. Do you see any nouns that you can make more specific or more exciting? Is there a word that you're using over and over that you can replace? See if you can find a place where you can show the reader what's going on instead of just telling them. Remember, as you make these additions, you can use sticky notes or strips of paper if you don't have space on your rough draft. We are now that much closer to being done with our personal narratives. Finally! Only 2 lessons left. Tomorrow we will work on our endings, and then on Friday we'll finish editing and publish our writing. I can't wait to read y'all's narratives.